Welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm Richard Restucia, your host and Vice President of Water Management Solutions for Jane Irrigation. And today we're going to be talking about irrigating strawberries. And the reason why we're spending our time on this is one, strawberries are a pretty important crop to the state of California, that's for sure. Number two, the way and how you manage your water and irrigation for strawberries can make a big difference in how much water you're using. And with drought being such a, and water conservation being such a big subject these days, we want to look at the best ways to manage our water most efficiently. And then finally, the other reason we're talking about this is, well, there's just different ways to manage water and nutrients with strawberries to change their taste, their flavor. And I know a lot of that is proprietary information, but it's always fun to think about that and think about the way you water and the nutrients you provide during your water might impact the outcome of your product. So those are the things we have in store for you this afternoon. Now, helping us learn all this is Frank Toves. And as you have seen Frank on these episodes before, he really does well with growers in Central California. Frank's one of these guys that gives me hope about water conservation and the future of agriculture because he is so committed to water conservation and making sure growers are doing what's right and best for them at the same time. You know, Frank has worked in this industry for a long time now. He's a real leader when it comes from ag and ag tech. He went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and has great ties and reaches in there. And he's joining us today. And Frank, I want to say I read your blog post this morning about, and this isn't what we're talking about or supposed to be talking about today, but you're talking about treating and reusing wastewater, especially in indoor grows. For those of you who are watching, not now, but as soon as we're done, I want you to go to the IDC website and read this log. It's really fascinating. I think this whole idea of reusing water or capturing water that we're using for some high water using crops is really important. So Frank, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Richard.
Yeah,
it's always a good time to be on.
Yeah, a lot going on, right? And yeah, I just wanted to touch on that though. What motivated you to write about irrigation, wastewater, and treatment?
Just the water pressure that we're facing, worldwide, and specifically here in California with what we're seeing in the Central Valley and the Northern Valley with the zero water allocations. I mean, growers that are getting zero water means they can't irrigate, right? So us on the coast, we have the luxury of having well water, and that luxury is going to be coming to an end before we know it. So we have been pushing growers and helping growers use drain water and reuse water where they can and save water where we know it's being wasted. So that's, it's something that we're working on every day on projects that we're working on. So I felt it was a good fit to write about and start that conversation with growers that maybe aren't doing it.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it must feel like to be a grower. And I always think about when they would get a 5% allocation or a 7%. And I would look at that number and I'd say that is a 5% allocation, not a 5% reduction, but just a 5%, which is pretty close to zero, right? I mean, I don't know how much you can do with just 5%. And then to get a zero, I can't imagine how devastating that
exactly.
Be. So are the strawberry crops in California, are they suffering due to the water situation?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, we do see a lot of growers looking at alternative methods of growing with substrate, greenhouse, tabletop type growing. So we know that water is a pressure that they're facing, and I say it starts with managing the water that they're using. So allocations on the coast, like I said, most guys have well water. So what we're seeing and hearing is that well water is going to be restricted as well. So no longer do you have the freedom to irrigate how you want, right, with the well water that you have. So they're gonna dictate what you can use. And I know in the Oxnard area and the more areas that are facing urban intrusion, they already have those issues, right?
So yeah, so the restrictions are tough. right? And getting tougher is what you're expecting.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Frank, help us out here. How big of a crop is strawberries to California?
Well, in California this year, they're going to plant about 36,000 total acres between the summer and fall crops. And that number varies from year to year, depending on how many growers, how successful the previous years were. But strawberries are consistently one of the top 5 commodities in California. So
So, wow, I mean, that's pretty big. And imagine that makes up a pretty good percentage of strawberries nationwide.
yeah, definitely over 90% of the fresh strawberries come from California that are supplied to the United States.
Wow. So anything that's happening for water and water restrictions don't just impact California, but really the rest of the country as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So as I drive by the strawberry fields, I see various different irrigation methods being used. In your opinion, what's the best method? What should growers be doing right now as far as irrigation?
Well, traditionally, the strawberry crops are established with overhead aluminum sprinkler pipes, like you would see for row crop vegetables or land prep uses. This is not the primary form of irrigation. They're using it for, like I said, plant establishment to drive salts down, to get that flushing of the soil. Um, and I would say drip, which is the main source of irrigation for strawberries, is the correct way to do that. So drip tape, multiple lines on a bed, strawberry bed.
Yeah. So right. So they're doing these raised beds, right? Is basically what it looks like, right?
Yep.
A raised bed, and they're putting 2 or 3 lines. And I think I've seen that the size of those beds or the spacing between them has changed from area to area. Is that right? Am I seeing that correctly?
Yeah, up here in the Watsonville, Salinas area, you'll see center to center bed spacing from 48 to 52 inches. And then as you head south, Santa Maria is typically 64 inches, with Oxnard being 68 inches. So, a lot of that having to do with cultural practices, tractor sizes that are available and implements and equipment that's been established from before our time, right?
Yeah, I wonder it's interesting because those areas aren't that far geographically from each other. It's not like states away. It's 100 miles or a few hundred miles, and to see that difference is really kind of interesting to me. So,
Yeah, and you
um,
have growers that grow in all those regions, and they practice all those different methods, right? So it's really an area specific uh, growing practice, really, and it has to do with plant densities. And if you talk to somebody from Oxnard and someone from Watsonville, they'll both say they have better yields, right?
right. Well, that's the way it should be, right? I'd be disappointed if it wasn't. So, so they're putting the drip tape in the beds when they're constructing the beds, right? And they're
Yeah.
um,
So they'll have a bed shaper that will lay the tape, and in most cases also lay the plastic mulch that goes on top, all at the same time.
yeah. And then, but they're also using sometimes some other overhead spray.
Yeah, definitely. That's that overhead, typically aluminum sprinkler pipe laterals with a impact sprinkler, right, to establish that plant, and especially down in the Oxnard and some of the Santa Maria areas where you have those Santa Ana winds. So those initial irrigations are critical to be done with sprinklers.
So so I think right where so they transplant strawberries, is that right?
Yeah.
So then I'm going to get my transplant started and going. Is this that overhead irrigation? Is that typically a weeks or days that you're using this? What?
It can range from as little as 3 to 4 weeks to as long as 7 to 10 weeks, just depending on the area that you're in. And some growers up here in the north, Watsonville area, have moved to drip only. So it really varies by the area as well.
Yeah. So, all right. So there's no hard, fast science of when I can stop my overhead irrigation and go full time on drip.
No, and you know, a lot of growers are using, they used overhead without really knowing why they were using it. And there's a lot of studies out there that have shown that it's because of salt leaching is one of the main reasons on top of the plant establishment. So those initial irrigations help wash the salts and the buildup in the soil past the root zone of the strawberries to help them establish.
Yeah. Huh. It's pretty interesting stuff when you think about it. It's all quite complicated. I want to remind everybody that we have both Q&A and chat open today. If you've got some questions for Frank, I see one has already come in, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we do, I wanted to ask Frank about flow rates. Is there a flow rate, in your opinion, that seems to work better, or your experience that works better than others?
Yeah, so when it comes to drip tape and flows on strawberries, you'll hear the growers talk about low, medium, and high flow, and they're referring to typically the Q100, which is the flow rate in gallons per minute per 100 feet of the drip tape that they're using. Now, that lingo is confusing, especially for the irrigation dealers and manufacturers, because a low flow drip tape in strawberries is totally different than that in row crop lettuce. So what we like to try to train our growers and our salespeople is that a low flow is a specific flow rate. And in this case, it's a 0.34 or 0.4 GPM per 100 feet of drip tape.
So, okay. So that matters, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all, you know, the soil type will dictate what some growers use, cultural practices, you know, what they've done forever, what my neighbors are doing. So, you know, a lot of those things dictate what's done. And these days, a lot more growers are actually turning to us for the actual designs and to better use the water that they have. So where we're seeing that change as well.
Yeah. Well, that's neat. So you've got some growers that have been growing for a while that are coming to you and saying, "Gee, is there a better way I can do this?"
Yeah, they come to us and say, "Hey, am I using the right drip tape? Do I have the correct number of lines per bed? What are the benefits from 2 to 3 lines, say, on a 64-inch bed?" And we're actually looking at this and helping them determine flow rates, set sizes, coordinate that with their planting and picking schedule. So we're doing a lot more than just selling drip tape.
Yeah, it's nice to see, right? As technology is getting better, everybody's trying to improve their management practices, especially when it comes to water. So we've got a question here, Frank, and I don't mean to put you on the spot with this one, but somebody's asking about the mini revolvers from Jane. Are people using those instead of the impact sprinklers, and why would they?
Definitely, yeah. I would say very heavily in the Oxnard area and Santa Maria area, and some up here in the north. They even have become a direct replacement for the aluminum sprinkler pipe in a lot of the areas. Initially, you know, way back, we did some trials on some other competitive brands of a micro sprinkler, which was more of a spray type sprinkler that you would see in a permanent tree crop application. And what we found was there was a huge benefit on the control of mites, spider mites, because what it did was it created a climate that promoted the predatory mites that were being used to combat those spider mites. So along with that, we found that we could replace the aluminum sprinkler pipe with a much more efficient micro sprinkler, in this case with the Jane mini revolver, and still achieve the leaching effect and the establishment effect of a sprinkler.
Oh, wow, that's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of people would think that, in particular, the leaching issue, right? Oh, I need to have that big impact. I need to move a lot of water, but that wasn't necessarily the case.
No, and we were able to, you know, reduce the amount of water that was applied, because you got to keep in mind you have a raised bed with plastic mulch with holes in it, right, where the strawberry plants are at. And that water that's being applied through that overhead impact sprinkler may not always reach the soil, and you have a lot of visual runoff. So if we're able to apply a lower amount of water, in this case, more than half the amount of water being applied, you get more of the water to the actual soil rather than running off the mulch plastic.
Yeah. And so I think when I look at the big impacts too, as far as looking like it's raining, it does sometimes look that way. There's a lot of water going everywhere.
Yeah.
I imagine what's actually evaporating is probably pretty high, and I'm going to guess the distribution uniformity then for the mini revolver is higher than the impacts.
Yeah, and Larry Davis at Jane has actually done a lot of work on this, and we've been able to get upwards past 85% distribution uniformity. So it is approved by the NRCS for funding. So with an aluminum impact sprinkler system, you're looking at maybe mid 70s on a new system, and most of the strawberry guys are using rental pipe that may not be the best, right? Depending on where you're getting it. And we've seen some uniformities below 40%. So
Yeah.
definitely an improvement when using a mini revolver.
So, that's good to hear. The other thing I'm wondering about is mostly those the solid sets are being moved from place to place, right? Field to
Exactly.
field, right? You put it in, you move it, a lot of labor for that. With the mini revolvers, so they set them up and do you just leave them?
You can, yeah. So what we're seeing is growers are not only installing these systems for the early on 3 to 10 week sprinkler applications, but keeping them in the field throughout the majority of the season to help with those mite control and other benefits that they provide.
Yeah, very cool. So the other thing, I know we've got some viewers asking right now, and what they want to know about is, can you really change the way a strawberry tastes based on the way you irrigate it and supply nutrients to it?
Yes, you can. And every grower, every label has their proprietary way that it's done. But you will notice. I know we were talking earlier about a farm stand strawberry, say in the Santa Maria Valley or down in Oceanside, Orange County area. You can taste the difference between that strawberry and one that you purchase at the store. Right, it's much sweeter. Just has a better taste versus some of the strawberries that are irrigated and they have a nutrient regimen so they can travel, right? So they can make it somewhere and be on the shelf for 2 weeks. So there is a definite science behind how they're irrigated and their fertilizer program. And it's interesting to see it's not just put some drip tape out and some NPK and call it good, right?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. I've got my local roadside guy that I don't know. I think I spend $5 a pint. It's
Yeah.
expensive, but it's worth it, and I have to drive a ways to get it. But they'll spoil you. But I think you're right. They don't last as long as I thought, and I imagine some of the strawberries you're growing in the Central Coast area there is making its way all the way to New York. I can't imagine how many days plus the shelf life in the store. And that's a whole different science, right?
Yeah, definitely. From the breeding all the way to the growing, it's these plants and these crops are designed to go to specific areas, and there's a lot behind it. Other than we're just one of those small inputs, right?
Yeah. And so, Frank, we've got one more question coming in, and this has to do with uh, strategies around. I'm sorry, I've lost the question here. I'm sorry. It has to do with salinity again, and how big of an issue is that? I know we talked about the impacts or the mini revolver taking care of this. How long are people putting an application in once a week, once a month? How does that work, and how do they track that?
Interesting that you say is the Cal Poly ITRC did some studies on trying to eliminate sprinklers altogether and use drip tape for establishment. And one of the things they found was that, say, on a 3-line drip system, so 3 lines on the raised bed, if the irrigation isn't managed correctly, you can actually push the salts to the center and up, causing a lot of die out in the center row of plants. So the salts, they definitely need to be managed. And what we help the growers do is determine what amount of water the plants need and help them with pulse irrigation. That we really see that as a benefit. And if they have solid set mini revolvers, those can be ran as well. Every few weeks to help with that.
Yes, on that raised bed with the strawberry plants. So you're saying 3 lines of tape.
Mhm.
Are you also looking at 3 rows or 4 rows of strawberries?
They would have 4 rows in that instance. And what we found was that those center rows, there was a lot more die out because of the salt buildup from the nutrients.
Yeah, and strawberries are actually a pretty shallow rooted plant. Is that right?
Definitely, yeah, they are.
So does that make it harder or easier to water because of that?
It's hard to say, right? I mean, I would say it makes it slightly more difficult because you have a smaller area to manage, but the soil is pretty forgiving. So, but I would say a little bit harder.
Yeah, I would think so too, because getting it just right is a lot harder.
Yeah,
I can see how it would be easier to overwater and easier to underwater.
definitely. Yeah.
Both of which you don't want, with a shallow root. And in general, do you consider strawberries to be kind of a thirsty crop or middle of the road, or?
For a traditional fall planted, berry crop, they use about 2 acre feet of water through the season. So, um, relatively average, I would say. That when you're talking about drip, a lot of guys will think that the drip is actually less water being applied at once. But when you have, say, 3 or 4 lines of drip tape, you can actually have a higher flow rate per acre than you would on, say, sprinkler pipe.
Right.
Believe it or not.
Yeah, interesting. So, well, Frank, this has been this has been really interesting. We've learned a lot about how to irrigate strawberries, as typical, right? As usual, we always find out that things vary based on where you are, what kind of soils you have, what strawberries you're growing, and but we love getting your experience, especially in this area where you're working in it so actively. It's been really helpful and really interesting. So thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, definitely.
So for our viewers, I want to thank you for joining us today and remind everybody that we've got all our trainings at janesusa.com/trainings on our website. You can also listen to us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We're on Google, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as a host of others. So we hope you'll check in with us there too while you're driving job to job. And then Friday, we're going to be back. We've got Daniel Martinez with ET Water, and he's going to be talking about a new feature with ET Water called time restrictions. We've got day restrictions, block days, when you don't want to water for one reason or another. We have water windows, the time in which you want to water. And now we have something in addition to this called time restrictions to really dial in accurately when you want and time of day you want your water to run. So that'll be a training on Friday. Hope you'll come back and join us. Again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time today. And Frank, again, thanks so much. Always appreciate your inputs.
Anytime, Richard. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Bye now.